Secondly, the enforcement of the regime is much stricter. We have repeated military incursions into the West Bank, let alone Gaza. Gaza tends to attract most of the attention, but there are regular raids carried out by the IDF into the West Bank, and arrests are made, and Palestinians are shot and killed. And what is interesting is that in South Africa, political activists were tried by the regular criminal courts of the land in open proceedings, whereas in Israel, Palestinians are tried by military courts, which have emergency rules and regulations inherited from the British, but they are not proper courts. I think perhaps the most important distinguishing feature is that there are no positive features about Israel's apartheid. The South African apartheid regime did attempt to pacify the black majority by providing it with material benefits. And so schools were built, universities were built, hospitals and clinics were built by the apartheid regime. Special factories were built in the black areas in order to encourage workers to work in the African areas. So there was a very positive side, although it was a materialistic side, to the apartheid order. Whereas in the case of Israel's apartheid, Israel makes virtually no contribution to the welfare of the Palestinian people. It leaves it all to the donor community. And of course this raises the question, which is debated vigorously in Palestine, about whether it is wise for the donor community to bail Israel out, whether it would not be wiser just to withdraw and let the whole world see how nasty the Israelis are in Palestine. But that's a separate question. Let me just conclude by making some comments on the response of the international community, because this is another area of great difference. You'll recall that the apartheid regime was vilified internationally in the United States, in the West, and throughout the world. States subjected the apartheid regime to sanctions. The United Nations was active. It also imposed limited sanctions on South Africa. So the international community took the view that apartheid was an illegal regime and everything should be done to get rid of it. Whereas we know that in the case of Israel, although there are serious and manifest violations of international law, no action is taken by Western states or by the international community. We all know the reason. I suppose in the States you must say ultimately it's the strength of IPAC and the evangelical lobby, but I think it's in the West generally it's feelings of Holocaust guilt, as if the Palestinians were responsible for the Holocaust rather than the Europeans. And so we see a double standard being applied in respect of Israel. And I think this has serious implications for the future. One can understand the comments made by President al-Bashir. He says, well, you know, it's fine for me to be subjected to an arrest warrant, but what about Gaza? And this is a plea one hears in the developing world repeatedly. You ask us to take action against Sudan, Zimbabwe, Burma for human rights violations, and I believe that action should be taken against these states. But the developing world said, why do you ask us to take action against these states when you yourself are engaged in the protection of Israel. So it's very difficult to know what is going to happen in this situation. I'm fairly despondent about the United Nations. The General Assembly and the Human Rights Council have very little powers. The Secretary General of the United Nations is trying to think of a polite word, is timid, shall we say. The Security Council is hampered by the veto, and the quartet, whose very origin is suspect, is clearly under the control of the United States. In 2004, the International Court of Justice gave an advisory opinion holding that the wall is illegal. That has simply been ignored by the Security Council and the Secretary General, the quartet. There are demands for another advisory opinion on the question of the consequences of prolonged occupation coupled with apartheid and colonialism. But again, such an opinion, even if given, is likely to be ignored. But I think there are some hopeful signs in respect of movements in civil society. We do see the question of action against Israel over Palestine being raised on university campuses, in church and in trade unions. And I do tend to get the impression that public opinion is beginning to shift, even though government policies remain much the same. Well, let me end there and answer any questions that you may wish to raise.